We've continued to slice into conference realignment from every angle possible, and we're back again with some new information that we've been told from a couple of different angles, so let's jump right into it. The SEC and ESPN have been in negotiations that would rework their media rights deal if the SEC, the Southeastern Conference, was to add more members. This is big news, and we've given you the info right off the bat. So because we didn't bury the lead, make sure you hit that subscribe button and stay tuned. On the surface, it may not seem like this is huge news, but it is. What's it mean? Well, it means that the SEC anticipates adding more teams, and they're trying to get ahead of it by reworking their deal with ESPN. We told you in an earlier video about what the SEC Commissioner, Greg Sankey, would be looking for if the SEC added more teams. Number one, it was to not expand the regional footprint that they have. He bragged about how they didn't expand it very much with Oklahoma and Texas. And then he also wanted to bring in teams who were all in on athletics, football especially. What we told you is that no two teams that are not in the SEC currently fit this description better than FSU and Clemson. There are probably other teams that you could find that maybe fit this description. We've thought about Oklahoma State, we've thought about TCU and others, but nobody else fits this quite to the level of the Seminoles and the Clemson Tigers. So here's why the negotiations matter, and don't miss this. The caliber of the team that the SEC is able to get is surely going to impact how much ESPN has to pay for them. If the SEC was to bring in a power from the Big 12 or the ACC, some of those teams we mentioned, Clemson, Florida State, Oklahoma State, TCU, they would certainly have a larger media portion allocated to them than if they brought in somebody that was like Memphis or USF or a team like that. So here's where it gets good for Florida State, and don't miss this. It's also probably good news for Clemson, but we're kind of just focused on the Noles in this one. ESPN is a business, and we know that Disney likes to make money. The SEC is a business, and they like to make money as well. Their interests are very aligned. Now, when it comes to Florida State, we told you last week about the Big Ten loophole, how the requirement of being an AAU member to get access to the Big Ten is not there. Florida State could theoretically get in without having to be an AAU member. While this is great news for the Seminoles, it's not great news for ESPN and the SEC. It means that Florida State has options, and it means that they can drive the price up. ESPN is making money on Florida State right now. And simply put, if the Noles go to the SEC, ESPN will continue to make money on them. If the Noles go to the Big Ten, then ESPN no longer makes money on one of the top 10 brands of all of college football. Simple logic would tell you that ESPN will not stand for this. They will absolutely be in the SEC's ear trying to push for the SEC to not let Florida State and I believe Clemson, as we mentioned earlier, potentially get away. Now, why is this so good for Florida State? Because as hard as ESPN is going to push to keep that FSU money in the SEC, the Big Ten is going to work equally as hard to gain that revenue. It's an absolute arms race right now, and Florida State is going to come out on the better side for it. I want to get into a couple of conversations that I've had, but just before I do that, I do want to give some love to our friends over at Gramco. You can go to thegramco.com right now, and you can use code TJ25 for 25% off at checkout. Most codes that you find just about anywhere for Gramco are all 20% off. Look anywhere. I've got a couple of other channels that I work on, and both of those codes are 20%. Because you guys have been the most loyal and faithful customers that they've had, they continue to give you guys 25% off of all of their Delta 8 and THC products that they've got rolling. Make sure that you're going to thegramco.com. Try the blue raspberry gummies. They're the absolute best for your Delta 8 needs. Thegramco.com, TJ25, one of the last remaining 25% product codes that they have out there. All right, here's why this is good for FSU. The Florida State Seminoles are going to have options. And as I told you in my last video, speaking with folks connected with Florida State, I think our timeline is between 3 to 5 years to be out of the ACC. In speaking with folks at Florida State, not to repeat things in the last video, but I do think this is so crucial, I was told pretty point blank directly, I don't know if we can afford financially to wait longer than that. The ACC is going to dissolve, and essentially what it will come down to is whether or not the teams in the ACC that decide to break or challenge the grant of rights by dissolving the conference, whether or not they can face that financial risk that's going to come with dissolving the ACC. If they feel they can withstand the risk, in a couple of years, they will do it. At this point, the risk is probably just a little too great. And that's why, even though we all know what will happen with this conference eventually, you haven't seen anyone try to break away just yet. I think as time goes on, that risk goes down year over year over year. And I think that that's the biggest news for what we're looking at today, is that as that risk goes down, as Florida State gets in more and more and more of a dire situation, they fall further and further behind their competitors like the LSUs of the world, the Floridas of the world, the Alabamas, the Georgias, the teams that they're doing their very best to compete against. As Florida State and Clemson continue to fall further behind, I think that's when they will see that that risk is worth it, and they will challenge the grant of rights along with likely 6 other teams that are looking to leave the conference. Now, there very likely will be a lawsuit that comes in with that, whether it be from ESPN, the ACC's leadership, or wherever, maybe some of the other institutions that stay in the ACC. But I don't really think that if Florida State was to go to the SEC, that ESPN would be suing a team that is joining a conference that they own. I think that at that point, Florida State would be in a much better light, and I think that Florida State would probably get out of any kind of a lawsuit because I just cannot see ESPN continuing to pursue there, as ESPN is going to understand that Florida State will make them so much more money in the SEC than they ever could have in the ACC. We talked about this in a previous video, how the carryover, how the idea that Florida State and Florida are in the same geographic area, how that is a misnomer, how that is not necessarily something that's relevant to the ESPNs of the world, to the other major media conglomerates, how the fan bases just don't have that much of an intersection. And so, again, I think that once you get to that time frame, once you get down the road, I truly believe that ESPN will be the deciding factor. And I think that this is where Florida State ends up. Speaking with a couple of folks close to the situation, they've told me that at the end of the day, they cannot see ESPN letting Florida State get away to be Fox's, to be in the Big Ten, and them not capitalizing on that revenue. Florida State and Clemson fit what the SEC is looking for to a T. And just do not see a scenario where they allow the Seminoles to get away. Now, the best thing for the Seminoles is they still have the options. And I believe that the price will get ponied up on both sides. I think that ultimately this is a really, really good thing for Florida State. Not only the fact that the SEC is actively working on renegotiating their rights to bring on more teams, but that the Big Ten has relaxed on their requirements as well. Florida State and Clemson are probably the most attractive 2 programs in the country, with the exception of potentially Notre Dame, for any conference to bring on. They're certainly the best pair in tandem. When you think about maybe the next best pair being Washington and Oregon, that just doesn't hold a candle to what Florida State and Clemson would bring to any conference. I think we're close. I think we're 3 to 5 years away from getting some kind of an update. We may have an update before that, but I think we're 3 to 5 years away from getting some kind of resolution. I think that's the time frame for which Florida State, Clemson, and others will be out of the ACC. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear what you think. Where do you think the Seminoles end up? Let's talk about it down below. Again, before this video, I haven't really asked for subscribers in quite a bit, but we've got some pretty big goals as the season approaches. So do us a favor, and if you watch our videos regularly, just click that button. You're already seeing us in your homepage anyway, so just help us out just a little bit by clicking that subscribe button. We've got plenty more FSU and conference realignment coming, so make sure that we keep this party rolling here. Now, I know a lot of you have doubts on all of this, and you want to argue with me on this point or that point about conference realignment. What's going to happen with the ACC? Could it really dissolve? Could the Noles, the Tigers, Hurricanes, all of these teams really get out? Well, I argued against all of those arguments in a video that you can watch by clicking right here. Go check it out and let me know what you think in the comments.